One of the most fascinating and heterodox ideas of Nietzsche's philosophy is the idea that our preferences in creative works are not a product of the author's free will or some soul, but proxies for a kind of physio-psychic constitution of the author, or a larger community to which the author belongs. In Nietzsche's writings, this constitution is often referred to as physiology, and is rooted in his ontology. As we said in the episode on ontology, an organism is composed of power centers, or wills to power, that organize themselves into a community with a division of labor and hierarchy. It's the organization and interaction of power centers in that community that determines the type of being that one is, meaning how they interpret the world, how they see it in a positive sense and judge it in a normative one. And this, in turn, determines the nature of one's creative works, and his preferences for art, philosophy, politics, morality, and so on. In this episode, I want to focus on two types of people that are central to Nietzsche's philosophy: the life-affirming and life-denying types. First, let us define what these two types are. The word life here is referring to certain essential characteristics about existence, which follow from Nietzsche's ontological claim that the world is the will to power. These include 1. That all action is the overcoming of resistance, the impression of one force upon another. 2. That consequently all action is egoistic, including selfless acts such as love and altruism. 3. That the individual is no more than the sum of his passions, or drives and instincts, which seek out resistance. 4. As a result of 3, all action consists of a yearning and existence is suffering. And 5. Our worth is measured by our ability to endure and overcome resistance, and that a hierarchy or order of rank exists between individuals based upon it. Those who affirm life often go by the name the noble, the strong, or higher man in Nietzsche's philosophy. These sorts of people embrace, celebrate, and manifest these qualities, meaning 1. They set themselves at the standard of what is good. They embrace and celebrate all their passions, including their instinct for cruelty, acting authentically and without a guilty conscience. 2. They are hungry. They personify the essence of existence, which is the will to power. They are teeming with ambition and vitality, and consequently seek to express and impose themselves upon the world. Nietzsche often uses the term overflowing to describe this trait. 3. They seek out challenges and danger, and can withstand a tremendous amount of suffering. And 4. Most importantly, they say yes to all the so-called evils of existence: war, suffering, pain, chaos, transience, irregularity, meaninglessness. For them, these are a great stimulus to life. Some examples of life-affirming individuals are Napoleon, Cesare Borgia, and many other strongmen of history. In opposition to those who affirm life are those who deny it, which means to reject or evade its essential qualities. Life deniers go by many names in Nietzsche's writings, including the weak, the exhausted, the weary, the corrupt, the herd, and more. These are types of people who cannot bear the hardships and evils of life. They fold over at the slightest pang of resistance and approach life through their lack of vigor. These types of people represent the opposite of the will to power. They aren't a center of force impressing themselves upon the world, but a being whose power centers are in decline. There are two categories that life-denying people fall into. There are those to whom life is soporific. The suffering and hardship of life depresses them. As a result, they retreat into various forms of escapism and ascetic or reclusive ways of living. An example of this type of life denier would be Buddhists and pessimists, like the philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer. Others turn their weakness outward onto the life affirmers. They more perniciously seek to spite life because of their weakness, by living a life of what Nietzsche calls ressentiment. This is a reactive force that castrates everything that is noble, the brilliant, the strong, the beautiful, out of one's own weakness and ineptitude. The mentality is much like how a child wrecks a game board after he loses. The weak begrudge higher men, and in order to reconcile those feelings or exact some kind of material gain from them, they conspire against them with other weak spirits. Nietzsche calls that collective of weak spirits the herd. This is akin to how prey animals will collect together into large groups in order to protect themselves against larger beasts of prey. The members of the herd subordinate themselves to the collective, as that's what ensures their survival. The preservation of the herd becomes a standard of their existence. Thus, despite living authentic lives and using oneself as a standard of what is good, they delude themselves into praising their mediocre and conformist lives and all the social qualities that preserve the herd, namely pity, love, self-sacrifice, solidarity for the downtrodden. They do not celebrate the qualities that give one an advantage in the war of all against all, such as strength and cunning. Morality is another consequence of the herd. The herd formulates universal moralities and bad conscience to keep each member of the group subordinated to its preservation. Moreover, they take solace in hopeful delusions like afterlives with qualities which are opposite to life, a world without suffering and which is eternal, where the meek are rewarded and the noble are judged and sentenced to eternal torment. One of the most common attacks by the herd against higher men is the revaluation of noble values. This is when the herd vilifies higher men and elevates themselves to the standard of what is good. As Nietzsche says, they take revenge on their masters by turning their God into the devil. In the first essay of Genealogy of Morals, Nietzsche covers this topic. He writes extensively on how the modern conception of good and evil are rooted in this instinct. Formerly, in the pagan world, good was associated with nobility, and bad with the lowly. Nietzsche calls this master morality. But with the advent of Christianity, the dregs of society initiated a cultural revolution which ordered morality in their service. He calls this slave morality. Good came to be associated with the qualities that preserved the meek and the downtrodden of the herd, namely peace, pity, self-sacrifice, hope, love, and so on. And evil was transformed to mean all the former noble qualities which they resented, and anything that threatened the herd. As I previously said, what determines whether someone is a life-affirming or life-denying type is one's physio-psychic constitution. Specifically, it's the interaction between power centers in one's body that determines these two traits. The weak are a result of strife and chaos within the community of power centers. When the power centers are pitted against each other, like factions in a civil war, it results in a decline in the organism as a center of force. Nietzsche calls this decadence, and considers it a sickness. In opposition to this, when the community of power centers is well ordered, under a rigid hierarchy with a ruling drive at the fore, then the results are strong types who affirm life. Likewise, the most interesting and highest men are those who possess a multitude of conflicting drives, but can tame them under a strong will. Here, we once again see the prominence of order of rank in Nietzsche's philosophy, and the Heraclitean idea that conflict and tension are a source of generation. Because this dichotomy of types ultimately traces back to the body and not a soul, Nietzsche often discusses how various external influences, such as diet, climate, and political systems, affect one's physiology, which in turn affect our preferences for morality, art, philosophy, politics, and so on. For example, he blames the spread of the life-denying religion of Buddhism on excessive rice in the Asian diet, and European nihilism on alcohol. And he associates strength with the reabsorption of semen from sexual abstinence and the consumption of meat. Moreover, civilization plays a large part in promoting the production of life deniers because of the restraint that it demands of the individual. Nietzsche theorizes that when the passions of the individual aren't permitted to express themselves because of a bad conscience implanted into the individual by society, then they turn inward on the animal and cause the antagonism in physiology, which leads to decadence. To Nietzsche, most of the culture of the ancient world was life-affirming. He considered pagan religions to be life-affirming because the gods were a celebration and deification of human passions. Nietzsche speaks very highly of the ancient Greeks up until Socrates. He considers the tragic age of Greece to be the most noble of cultures. Moreover, he speaks fondly of the Romans up until Christianity and the Aryans with their law of Manu. With the advent of Christianity, however, Nietzsche saw most of the Western world as a life-denying culture in decline. There are some exceptions to this, namely the pagan peoples of Scandinavia, Renaissance Italy, and Napoleonic France. but it's not necessarily Christianity that's the culprit. Even with the decline of theism and meaning in the West, what Nietzsche calls the death of God, the life-denying instinct persists, merely manifesting in an atheistic form, through liberalism, hedonism, materialism, scientism, socialism, social justice, and more. In fact, Nietzsche predicts that the life-denying instinct of Western culture will only grow stronger before the arrival of the neo-tragic age and the overman. It should be clear by now that given the way he presents his two types, Nietzsche allies himself with the life affirmers, and that this is ultimately an account of his values. The affirmation of life is analogous to good, and the denial of life to evil. As we shall see in another episode, Nietzsche proposes a philosophy that seeks to affirm life to its fullest, what he calls the Dionysian. But what doesn't make this a traditional account of good and evil is that Nietzsche doesn't seek to eliminate what he considers evil, that is, the life-denying type. Nietzsche's reverence for the strong shouldn't be construed to mean that he doesn't value the herd. In fact, he believes that the herd is needed to support higher men. This once again traces back to the Heraclitean idea that conflict and opposition is a source of generation. Nietzsche merely wishes to remove the herd's influence on culture, their grasp on philosophy, politics, and art, and in this way to return to a traditional society with a rigid class system. This is just a brief introduction to Nietzschean values and the life-affirming, life-denying dichotomy. I'll dive deeper into each when I cover Nietzsche's concept of the Dionysian and his critique of Christianity and philosophy. As a last note, if you're wondering whether you are life-affirming or life-denying, then the ultimate litmus test for this is to read Nietzsche. For life-affirming spirits, his writing should be invigorating. A mania should come over you. If, on the other hand, you're repulsed or offended by Nietzsche's philosophy, then you're safe to say a life-denying type. Other than that, see you next time, guys.